Good afternoon. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Patent Literacy Symposium. This session, Turning the Ship Around, A Case for Change. My name is Kirsten DeRoche, and I'm excited to be here this afternoon and facilitate this session. A few housekeeping items before the session starts. Handouts for the session will be located on Schoology within the folder for today, June 11th, and in the time slot for 2.3.J, I think is the coding for this session, and under the name of this session. The session is being recorded and it will be 75 minutes long. The chat feature will be turned off between participants, but you'll be able to chat with me if you have any questions, and I will share those with the presenter. Please keep your video feature off and keep yourself muted to eliminate any potential distractions to the presentation. If you have any questions, please enter those into the chat and I will relay them to Dr. McMasters throughout the course of the session, or we'll address them at the end. And
so I'm back, but it already did the same thing again. So I'm wondering if I should run upstairs real quick just to see if there's an empty space, if you could give me 2 minutes, and just to make sure so that I don't keep leaving, because that happened last time.
It's however you feel most comfortable.
Okay.
Should I stop the recording right now?
So we can try it, but you froze just even in your introduction, and it popped me out and back in.
I'm thinking you're probably safer upstairs.
Yeah, let me turn off my video and run upstairs real quick.
Okay. Sounds good. I'm going to pause and then we'll pick it up back again when you're up there. Okay, welcome back. Okay, so I'd like to introduce Dr. Angela McMasters. Dr. Angela McMasters is a nationally certified school psychologist and a local letters trainer serving students and families at Indiana Area School District. Dr. McMasters has been a practicing school psychologist for 15 years. Additionally, she is an adjunct faculty member in the Education and School Psychology Department at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. Dr. McMasters has presented at state and national conferences on a variety of topics relating to reading, behavior, assessment, and intervention. As a wife and mother of 4 children, she enjoys her time outdoors on family hiking adventures, as well as stealing a few quiet moments for herself to get lost in a novel. Welcome, Dr. McMasters, and the floor is all yours.
All right, thank you. So thank you guys for your patience. I thought that I had some pretty solid internet connection downstairs, but I think as soon as we start the sharing and things like that, it just wasn't working out. So I'm here today to talk with you about a case study, and I'm here to share with you from the perspective of a few different roles, and I'll talk more about that as we go forward into our presentation today. So as Kirsten presented already, I'm a mom of 4 kids. I do love reading, and school psychology has been my passion for a very, very long time. And I'm a nationally certified school psychologist, so I always feel as though there's opportunities for me to learn and to grow. And I've had a lot of fortunate situations and experiences these past probably 5 years that have connected me on a different journey. So my oldest daughter is in 6th grade going to 7th, and my youngest, Finley there, she will be going into kindergarten next year. So it's been an interesting journey for me as a school psychologist and as a parent, as I see my kids learn and grow through their early development of literacy and reading skills. So I wanted to just give you a brief timeline of events. It's been very interesting to me how my career has kind of evolved and how my thinking has had to evolve alongside of these different experiences that I've had. So first of all, I took my first job as a school psychologist in 2005, and entering out, like, I knew how to help students that were struggling, whether it was an academic concern, behavioral concern. I felt like I had a strong foundation and was ready to go. In 2011, I earned my doctorate in education in school psychology, but my focus for my dissertation topic was formative assessment and reading achievement. And what I didn't realize now, or then that I know now, is that there was so much evidence to suggest that yes, we need to look at intrinsic motivation and factors that help support students' reading growth. But what I didn't know is how much science and evidence there is out there to support the practices that we use with students in the classroom. And that will be a part of my timeline coming forward here. So in 2014, I attended Letters Module 1 at the recommendation of Dr. Kowaleski. Some of you may know him. He was the MTSS RTI guru, and he was on my dissertation committee and was actually a faculty member at IUP. And I was getting ready to take over teaching a new course. And he said, hey, you should go to these letters modules. I think they're really going to help you present the content of this course. And so of course, I took his advice and I went. And then I found myself traveling all across the state to go to as many modules as I could possibly attend, because I knew that reading was multifaceted. I knew what the big five were, but I really struggled to see how all of those pieces came together to tighten up my recommendations for kids. And it was interesting because I was in several meetings with reading specialists, and they would talk about the student's growth in an intervention they were doing, for example. And she would say, well, a student has, they know all their syllable types, they have digraphs, and they have their blends down. And I just nodded and smiled and like, that's great. I'm so glad you're the specialist. Because I realized no one had ever really taught me the different syllable types either. And I loved to read. Reading has always been a passion of mine. And I actually said to my mom, I was like, I don't remember learning to read. And I said, do you remember me learning to read? And she said, I read to you all the time. I was blessed to be a stay-at-home mom. And she said, when you were toilet training, we read books and read books and read books. And she said, you started school and then you just started reading books. And so I don't remember what that was like. But as I've discovered on this journey, through the lens of someone that I love very much, I've been able to see what that's like for someone that doesn't acquire the skill of reading very easily. So then I came across Dr. Wendy Ferrone in my travels, and I was telling her how passionate I was about the content I was learning and how it was changing the way that I practiced and the way that I assessed kids and the way that I made recommendations. So in 2015, I was accepted into the Letters Trainer of Trainers cohort, which was led by Dr. Carol Tolman, to help me become an expert to teach teachers more about reading and how reading develops in the brain. In 2018, I had no idea that I was going to have a struggling reader of my own. And there were really no early indicators for me outside. There were some risk factors, which would be, for example, history of ear infections, those kinds of things. But I didn't have any significant red flags too early on in this child's educational career, because it was actually my son, Declan, that was struggling to acquire the reading skills. And I'm sure that some people were like, why are you sharing this story? This is your son. And I said, I never want to, there's one of many Declans, I think, in our world. And I think in my journey as a school psychologist, I've had so many of these kids sitting across from me at the table, and taking them through even just some of the assessment activities is grueling, and it just makes your heart hurt so bad that it's such a struggle. And I thought that I knew what that was like, but what I realized is I didn't know what that was like, because I've never experienced it myself, and I also wasn't able to view it from the lens of a parent watching their child struggle till I had Declan. So this is my buddy Declan, and he is my number 3 of 4. And just as you see in the pictures, he is very energetic, has a fabulous sense of humor. And I want to highlight what my experience has been from 3 different lenses throughout this case study, and then also kind of circling it back to any student that you work with. It's just that Declan happens to be mine. I had to do a case study as part of my letters training, and I have one living in my house. And it also allowed me to help practice my skills in reading and literacy as well. So one of my very favorite quotes are, "The limits of my language are the limits of my world." And yes, this is my own child, but I always look at each kid that I come across as like, what would I do for my own child? What is best for them? And that's why I think that in all of the work that we do, we really have to look at it through a lens of equity and equitable instructional practices and ways that we can ensure that we're reaching all kids. So here's my buddy. And what I wanted to share, so this was, let's see, so Declan is going actually into 3rd grade next year. And he started kindergarten. There were no concerns. His DIBELS assessment scores were great. He was on target. He was core. We get into 1st grade. You can see the beginning of the year benchmark assessments there. His composite score was within the core range and fairly solid core. And there weren't really any red flags to me. And I look at, the whole word's red and the benchmark's 1. Okay, so he just needs a little more practice, has to be taught, and then it will improve. So then we get to the middle of the year benchmark. And there were substantial drops in his performance. And as I looked at this, I thought, what is the difference? What's the difference from, where he started in 1st grade to the middle of the year? Because I will say that, and I'll say this a million times over, he had the most amazing teachers, and we've been so blessed because they have always worked alongside me. And so that partnership has been so important. And they were kind of wondering the same thing, scratching their heads, like, what's going on? Why is he struggling? So we had a lot of conversations around that. But what we realized was, as those reading demands it moved into more complex skills, that's where he was having difficulty. So he was having difficulty applying the phonics skills and the foundational skills to be able to accurately decode. And so this was the starting point, the red flag, where I was just like, okay, so what do we do? That comes with a whole lot of emotions, but we'll talk about that later. So in addition, as I had shared with you, part of my work was doing a case study. So, and I love assessment. Otherwise, you don't really become a school psychologist if you don't love kids' assessment data. And so in addition to those assessments, even at the start of the year, I had given him a phonics survey, the phonological awareness screening test, and the spelling inventory, just to kind of see what it was like to give those instruments and to also see how they aligned. And so again, anticipating based on his beginning of the year benchmark data and this information, I felt like he was just primed and ready to start 1st grade and move right out of the gates. And what I like about these different assessments is that they allow you to really hone in on specific skills that students need to have support with. And it goes through the basic to the more advanced phonics skills, spelling patterns, and even the manipulations of sound in phonology. So I just wanted to mention that. And if we need to circle back to the assessment part, I can share with you a little bit more about these resources. But these pieces and parts were very helpful for me in helping to think about ways to help him, which again, I wouldn't have had any of this if I didn't have my letters experience that I didn't know was going to help me help parent him, if that makes sense. So the things that kind of started getting me wondering, as I had said, is that the benchmarks were increasing in the complexity of the skills that were assessed. And Declan wasn't moving alongside of those. And so that's where when you think about the curricular expectations and the skills that are being taught, there was something there that wasn't right for him. And it got to the point where it was so seemingly not right that I started to think he had a learning disability. So I had him evaluated to rule that out, because I thought, maybe this is a Declan thing. Maybe this is just like my older two have gone through the same system. They're proficient readers. And he's just different. So there must be a Declan problem. So he was evaluated, and the results came back that he didn't meet the criteria to have a reading disability. And so that was rolled out, which was helpful for me as a parent too, to say, okay, so then we just need to move forward with support at home, more prescriptive instruction and things like that. So I wanted to just give you an idea as to what Declan's reading skills looked like in January. So in this timeline of 1st grade, he started the school year, then he moves into middle of the year, which is where the red flags started coming from. Then I realized, some of the books he was bringing home for practice for the reading homework, were leveled. So they were based on the results of the F&P assessment. And he was really struggling to translate the skills he was learning into practice. So I'm going to show you a video, and Kirsten, I'm probably going to have you, if my screen share doesn't work well, if you could just let me know so that I can fix that. And I hope I don't bottom out up here. But while I show you this video, I just want you to take a look at, first of all, thinking about what skills does Declan need to be able to read this book? And then second, and I think one of the more challenging parts of this is what behaviors he shows in response to the difficulties that he's having with reading.
Ant and the grasshopper.
Okay, so I think I need to fix my share, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna do a new share. Here we go. I'll get this all down by the time the symposium's over. All right, so I'm going to kind of jump you through parts of this video because you'll see that it is roughly 10 minutes in length, and that is the length of time that it took Dec to get through this book.
No. One. Worm.
Warm. This isn't
Warm.
bossy R. Warm.
Warm.
What letter?
Bay.
D.
Day. One day. One warm day. Grasshopper was in the grass.
Okay, so first off, you can see like the sight words, he has those down. Those ones were pretty solid. But as he got into some of those patterns that he hadn't yet been presented, he struggled. And whenever I was looking at the book, it was the focus for this one was why is the long E? And throughout the course of the book, the pattern was only presented 2 times. And then in addition, if you look at the complexity of the patterns, such as the bossy R and all of those kinds of things, he didn't know how to decode those yet because he didn't know that what sound those graphemes, when put together, what that produced. So I'm going to fast forward this a little bit more. And you'll have to bear with me because while I was running upstairs, I left my time stops downstairs.
This is actually too hard.
You're almost there. Keep going.
I am. How many pages?
Here, I'll help you. It's okay. I'll help you. It's okay. I'll help you. Ready? Come on. Up
You
here.
read this page and I read the other one.
You do.
Okay, then you read
Tap
the
my
other one.
hand if you come to a word you don't know, and I will help you.
Okay.
Well, you can't use it that quick.
So I told you he had a sense of humor. So that was one strategy I was trying to employ, and he's a great negotiator. So then we come forward and enter in Zoe around 4 minutes.
Ed glared at Ant. Angel glared at Ant. What are you doing? He
Sound it out.
asked Ant.
So you can see here, he's also looking to me for reassurance after he sounds something out. So he's not confident really in his decoding skills. Then I'm going to take you to the end of our time. Trying to remember where we were at. We'll start here and I might have to fast.
To grasshopper. Would you please read this page? It's a lot of words.
Okay. You point to the words while I read.
Yeah.
Ant gave
gave Grasshopper something to eat. Next time, I will.
All right. Let me go back to my PowerPoint share. Okay, Kirsten, are you able to hear me?
Yep, all good.
Good, just making sure. I always like to make sure after I'm bouncing back and forth between screens. So I know because of the platform we're in, we really can't have some discussion about this, but some of the behaviors that we see is that he's looking at me for reassurance. He's communicating. You can tell the frustration just based in it's a lot of words. And it's kind of even, it's hard for me because we've progressed so far that this case study, when I told Pam that I would present this, it's been a while since I've watched this. So as a parent, it gets my heartstrings again because he's come so far. And, but I will say that the behaviors that he showed in this video were so small compared to what he had shown at home at other times. I mean, he would be angry at me and he would, slam doors, or he would throw books, and those were all, I'm like, I do this for a living. I'm a school psychologist for a living. I know how to manage behavior. Why am I struggling so much in this situation? And I realized that, I was taking this from two different perspectives. So from the mom side, I mean, as with anything, you want your kids to have a little bit of struggle. You want them to persevere through challenging times. But this was me every single day, watching him come home and having to get through his homework, and then for us to do some different reading exercises that I'll talk more later. It was so hard for me to watch him go through that every day. Like, he's been frustrated all day long. Then add to that, you come home and you have homework to do, and you have a mom that is working to help support and teach you. And so you're doing more of what has been really hard for you all day long. So then I was stressed and frustrated, and it wasn't something that I could quickly turn over to my husband and say, you take over, because he didn't have the training that I had, which takes me back to, I know what to do to help Dec, and we've come a long way. And it was me again, alongside of his teachers, saying, hey, here's what we need to do. And I became overwhelmed with the behavioral challenges because it was so hard for me to stay patient and understanding, because I felt like no matter what I was trying, it was still just met with so much frustration. So that's where the school psychologist started to take over a little bit. So I was meeting with his teachers, and I still remember being at another building I worked with, and I was talking to the first grade teachers there, and I was said, oh, and I'm going to parent teacher conferences, and I have my little phoneme graphy mapping grid, and I have some of the lessons that he and I've been doing together. And she said, I would not want to go to a parent-teacher conference with you. And I said, I love his teachers. We work really well together. We're all in this together to help him acquire the reading skills that he needs. And I think that that's important, that in all of these times when we encounter these kids who are struggling, coming alongside parents, and it's been such a challenging time as teachers, I think, when you're providing instruction remotely now, or had been, where then it's like you're in your children's living rooms and their parents or their caregivers are right there with you. And the blessing that I think has come with that, in some of the feedback I've had from our reading specialists, is now parents have learned some tools for their toolboxes to be able to help their students. So as I had shared as well, we were working to figure out what are the skill deficits. We had already had him evaluated. He didn't have a learning disability, but we needed to figure out what the instructional match was going to be that would help him. And then from there, I was thinking of what resources do I have access to, or do I know of, that I could help pull from to teach him. Because what I discovered is it was those basic reading skills in phonology and phonics were those areas that he was struggling. And then to also monitor the progress from there to see if any of it was working. So I also mentioned in the description of our session today, and I've talked and highlighted a little bit of this when we look at the emotions that come along with this journey that Declan's on. And so I wanted to highlight this before I talk more about his plan. So I know most of you are familiar with the MTSS triangle, but looking at the social emotional learning piece is kind of the glue that holds your academics and your behaviors together, is the ability to self-regulate, have self-awareness, to manage your emotions. And this was one of the first times that I started to see what that was like for some of the students that I was working with, because many times, you know, they hold themselves together at school. And then you're talking and conferring with parents who say, homework is such a struggle. It takes us 2 hours. They hate it. They're struggling so much. And then at school, they don't show any of those behaviors. And so, you know, you try to start rationalizing it like, well, you know, there's so much more structure at school. The expectations are, you know, they aim to please their teachers. So it makes sense that that's going to come out at home because it's where they're most comfortable. But in actuality, there's all of this underlying social emotional work that's happening, because if you don't foster and promote growth and that self-confidence and the self-esteem, you start to see those negative behaviors take over, which then translates into negative self-talk, which is, again, something else I had a window into, where Dec would say, I'm stupid, I can't get this, I'm never going to be able to read, this is too hard. And as a parent, that is incredibly difficult to hear your child say at such a young age, because I'm thinking, you're in first grade, bud. You've got at least 11 more years of this and more, depending on what you're going to do. And the thought of him giving up and not persevering or not having the instruction that he needed to grow, that was something that was starting to eat at me as well. And this is the wheel, the castle wheel that looks at social emotional learning. And this is basically what I just kind of shared a little bit, is that the social and emotional learning piece is really important for literacy success. And it's kind of embedded within the classroom, in the schools, in the communities, and home. But it's really important for us to foster and promote that internal motivation and desire to get better and to improve. Because this is how Declan was describing himself. There was an activity that he did in first grade, and these are the words that he used to describe himself. And as a parent, I started to think, you know, how long is he going to be able to use these words to describe himself before he feels such a sense of defeat that he just gives up? And then it does become the kid who is the substantial behavior problem in the classroom. The one who just says, well, why am I even bothering to try? It's just not getting any better for me. So this was something that was really important for me to think about as a parent, but then also to think about from the perspective of other kids that we encounter. Because when we show behaviors, when kids show behaviors in the classroom, it's like, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Was there a learning difficulty, therefore frustration, so then they show behaviors? Or were there behaviors, therefore missed instruction, and then difficulty with reading or any academic area? So that's where the behavioral piece is so important. The other part, and when I was putting this presentation together, I was running it past a teacher friend of mine, and I said, I don't know if I should leave these parts in. You know, what do you think? And she said, I think you need to leave them. And she said, I'm a teacher, and I say these things to parents, and I say them because I'm operating from, you know, empathy and compassion, but I didn't realize until you shared this that it's because I'm not sure what else to offer. And again, to go back to, I just think, and I know sometimes there's sensitivity around this phrase, but when you know better, you do better. And it applies to me in my career as a school psychologist. As soon as I knew better, I was like, okay, what do I need to change? And there was a situation where I think that was equated to perception of like, I'm broken, I'm the problem. And that's not at all the case. I think the system is broken, and that's where we have to revisit and fix and realign. But these were some things that she said, you have to leave those in there, because we need to know that we have to start having answers. So Declan's a smart boy. It will all click for him one of these days. You worry too much, he's going to be fine. He'll catch on. Maybe he's not developmentally ready for reading. And that was really hard for me to hear. And I think it was hard for me to hear for a few reasons. I think it was hard for me to hear because I've seen kids' journeys through school when they struggle. It was hard for me when I see kids' behaviors in the classroom, because how awful it must feel to lose control like that in front of your friends and your classmates. Gosh, I'm getting emotional. So anyways, this is the parent side, right? So it's all operating out of goodness though, and the desire to really want to help kids. So that's kind of why I've been really passionate about the science of reading, even though when I was learning it, I didn't realize this is where my life was going to take me. So as I've translated a lot of this to my practice, I've really I do well with graphics. Graphics help me explain things to parents and teachers. And so Scarborough's reading rope is one of those graphics that I always come back to. And I've been blessed to also teach at the university level with future school psychologists. And I say, here's the tools that I want you to have in your toolbox. And this is one of them. I want you to be able to explain to parents and to teachers in some cases where students are struggling. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Scarborough's rope, basically what it highlights is how multifaceted reading skill development is. And so you have the top part of the rope and you have the bottom part. So the top part embraces language comprehension skills. So how much background knowledge does a student have on a topic? What is their vocabulary like? How well do they do with language structures and syntax? And then additionally, their verbal reasoning abilities. Can they navigate complex vocabulary discussions? And then literacy knowledge, so the different genres and navigating narrative versus expository text. So all of that language piece, and I learned, I didn't know this, that Scarborough didn't intend when this graphic was created to show the top ropes spiraling and the bottom ropes to be braided, but the way that I understood it was those top ropes are spiraled because you can always grow and expand in those areas. So those become increasingly strategic, whereas at the bottom, those 3 strands were braided because they have to be tight and they have to be efficient and they have to become increasingly automatic for students to be proficient readers. So to piggyback on what I heard Anita Archer sharing yesterday is that comprehension is the outcome of what we do. It's not necessarily something that we teach. And that's because all of these pieces and parts come together to create skilled readers. And so whenever I have the ability to apply then the skills that we're working on, we're covering so many different pieces and parts of this rope that I say to parents, it's not just reading, it's all of these elements within reading. So you have all these strands, but within each of those strands, you have teeny tiny little strands that filter into all of those, which would be, for example, all of the different decoding skills from the sounds themselves to, looking at variant vowels and graphemes, the digraphs and all those kinds of things. So this, again, is helpful because I can say, hey, their language comprehension, they're knocking it out of the park. But when we get to the word recognition area, we really have to focus back in on the decoding element. So at any rate, this was one way that I was looking at it. So whenever I was giving those different assessments, I knew Declan, in my own personal case study, that he does well when he's read something and we talk about it. Like his background knowledge application and how he would use vocabulary, he did really well with that. So for him, I knew that it was the word recognition piece. So that's where those screening measures that I shared at the start of the presentation come into play. So phonological awareness, that was where I gave him the pass, the phonological awareness screening test by Dr. Kilpatrick. For decoding, I used the core phonics survey. And for spelling, it was the Words Their Way spelling inventory. So those were the different assessments that I used to help dig deeper to figure out what skills were lacking. And the last piece that I wanted to highlight, I know I mentioned that it's multifaceted, but the other part that I missed highlighting is how it's acquired over years of instruction and practice. So it's like learning to play the piano. Without practice, you won't become a proficient piano player. So it doesn't happen overnight. So when you think about kindergarten, first, second grade, you're learning how to read. And then when you get to third grade and above, that's where you start to see the shift from learning to read to reading to learn. And so while we want to see our kids leaving our classrooms as readers in those primary grades, they might appear to be proficient readers, but then the struggle is as they get into the upper grade levels, they start to struggle with the multisyllabic words or the complex spelling patterns and things like that. So that's why it's important for us to think of this in terms of something that happens over time. And even with mathematics, I think about this often too. We don't dive into multiplication, division until we've even taught kids quantity discrimination. and basic addition and subtraction and things like that. So reading is very similar. Otherwise, you end up with what I call the Swiss cheese effect, where you start seeing holes because you can't ensure that you're systematically covering all of the patterns of our language unless it's done in some sort of a sequential way. So mapping out a strategy. This was the part where I was like, okay, where do we go from here? And this is the 4-part processing model for word recognition. And if you've gone through the letters module 1 training, this is kind of the foundation for how the brain recognizes words and is able to ultimately reach the comprehension level through the context. And this was another graphic that was really helpful for me. And basically what it represents are all of the different processing systems in our brain. So if you would take your right hand and you kind of make a fist, and I don't know if you can see mine, but if you do that, you just kind of hold it in front of you. The front part is where the phonological processor lies. And that's the part of our brain that's responsible for processing the sounds of our language. And then in the back of the brain, that's where we process the orthographic or the patterns and the letters and symbols of our language. And then in the middle is where the phonics piece, the connection happens between the phonological processor and the orthographic processor. I don't even know if I'm doing a good job holding that in my screen. So anyways, that communication in the brain and those pathways are really important. So the other part that we know, and I think probably because I'm a school psychologist, the brain, I kind of geek out on it, but the brains of young children are so malleable that we have the opportunity to strengthen the neural pathways of the brain. So you might have the synapses might be slowly firing, but the more practice that children have with those patterns, the more rapidly those synapses strengthen their connection. It's like, oh, that's an M. M says, So it doesn't, because otherwise, if you start to have a disconnect between what letters represent sounds, you're going to just break that bridge of phonics. And so that's something else that's important to think about too, is just how important that communication is between those different processors and how cool it is to have the ability to strengthen those connections for kids. And I always say, like, we talk about, I do this with kids that I work with, I'll say, how many letters are in your alphabet? And they say 26. And I said, you're right. I said, how many vowels? And they say 5. And I said, do you know what's crazy? I said, you have 26 letters, but there's 44 sounds and 18 of which are vowel sounds. And they are like, it's kind of funny because they get really cute and they geek out about it a little bit with me. But anyways, I think that that's really important for us to remember, is that it's more than just our 26 letters. And then from there, once we have those bottom pieces solid, ensuring that our kids have the knowledge to be able to access meaning and context. So there was a study of baseball, and you take students who are poor readers and engage them in something about baseball, but they know a ton about baseball, they're baseball experts, they can make better sense of that than somebody that's able to read about it but doesn't have the background knowledge. So that knowledge part is so important and so essential. So if you haven't picked up Natalie Wexler's The Knowledge Gap, I just finished reading it, and I probably could read it 2 more times because I feel like there's something I'm missing every time I go through it, because not only are those bottom parts so important, but as are the top as well. And then from there, the automaticity of it. So back to mapping out the strategy, and this again is something that you can do with all kids, is where is the disconnect? So looking at those areas and then saying, what can we do now that we know which areas we have to improve upon? So first of all, the phonological processor, I guess I talked a little bit about each of these, but maybe not a lot, is where we hold on to sounds and memories. And so we start to create these phonological hooks so that when we see and hear words, again, those connections just become much stronger. And you can either pay attention to the numbers or not pay attention to the numbers. For me, it's just the school psychologist brain with percentages and all those things. But basically, looking at that SNP for Declan, there were some areas of phonology and phonological awareness he needed to improve upon. And then the question there begs, is it because he's not really practiced manipulating sounds of our language? Or is it truly a phonological processing difficulty that he's experiencing? So that's where that tool comes into being helpful in supporting the phonology piece. And then from there, a spelling inventory. And I truncated the spelling inventory because it took up a lot of space in my slides. But Declan did great with being able to spell very basic CVCs. He could isolate he could correct beginning, correct ending, correct medial short vowels. He started to fall off at the blends, which would be pretty typical for the start of first grade, I would say. So I wouldn't have expected anything different. Again, going back to, you kind of think you're okay until you're not okay. And here's just a quick writing sample from Declan. And this would have been the start of first grade, where he's writing about dinosaurs. My favorite dinosaur is a black T-Rex and a Diplodocus, and I don't know what that one is, and a Triceratops. The black T-Rex, they are big and orange and black. So he's very repetitive in what he's saying. He tries to be a little bit descriptive, which was probably because his teacher circled back a few different times. So he's trying to use some larger words, but they were names of dinosaurs, which I'm not sure many of us can spell anyways. And then from there, though, looking at letter formation and spacing and all of those other parts of writing that we have to be proficient and fluent with, so that we can free up the cognitive desk space to really put on paper what we want to do. So all in all, though, he produced a decent amount, and there were some words that he spelled well. So the question is also, did somebody help him spell some of those words? But he did do well with even breaking apart and hearing the different sounds in some of the words. So even if you look at the word favorite, for example, and most of the basic sight words he spelled correctly, such as and or they, and words like that. So then after looking at the phonological part and the orthographic processor through spelling, we look at phonics. And Declan was doing well with knowing his letters, corresponding sounds, long vowel, short vowel, and CVC. But then he started to struggle with the consonant blends, and then moves forward into more advanced phonics skills from there. So the roadmap for Dec was phonology, orthography, and phonics. So it was all of those bottom parts of the 4-part processing model. So while at school, Declan's teachers were really hard at work as well. So they were actually, he was part of a foundations group, and it wasn't something that was school-wide yet, but it was part of a pilot group. So he was in that group of students. They started using Heggerty in the spring. So he was getting some extra practice in phonology. And then the core literacy program was benchmark literacy. And then at home, I was kind of reinforcing all of those different skills through phonics lessons using West Virginia Phonics, phoneme grapheme mapping, so that he had to put those placeholders in for the sounds to make sure that he was spelling accurately. And that was a very useful tool, and something that it's been interesting to see his skills evolve, because he's really improved across the board, even with his printing, and his penmanship and his handwriting is so much neater. So now we'll take a look at his end of year data and his growth. So this evolved from January, where there was that substantial dip, to I think we collected the last data point like end of March, beginning of April, just to kind of see where he was at, because we were getting into the end of year conferences and trying to figure out what was going to be best for him for the next school year. And then I will also share with you what his charts look like and things like that. So at the end of the year, he had really started to, because obviously we want mastery of these phonics skills. It's just like we want mastery of those basic math facts. SH always says shh, it doesn't change. So in our brains, and this is what I wanted to mention when I was talking about the 4-part processing model, our brains are pattern seeking. So when you know the patterns and you've been taught the patterns, they become automatic. So then you just start to it's like driving a car. You just start doing it and you don't really think about all the steps you have to do to drive your car. It's very similar when it comes to strengthening those pathways to build those skills in phonology and phonics, so that you can access your context, your meaning in your context whenever you're reading. His spelling inventory, he also improved. And this was interesting because if you, whenever I gave those, he wasn't even able to go very far. He ceilinged out. So there's no sense in me giving him ones that he was going to get none of them correct. So even after 3 months of intervention, he was able to take the assessment the whole way to the end, which was really awesome. And we started to see that the patterns that had been taught were ones that he was replicating. So when we really look at what his growth looks like, so this was growth from the middle of the year to the end of the year. And so if you look at where he started in the middle of the year, he still wasn't putting the sounds together to say the words. He didn't have any whole words read. His oral reading fluency was significantly below where it should be, as was his accuracy. Come back to the end of year benchmark where he basically almost doubled his correct letter sounds in a minute, and his whole words read went from 0 to 20, which was tremendous, especially given that at the beginning of the year he was a 0, and at the middle of the year he was a 0. So really he didn't make much growth in that quick application of the sound, of blending the sounds together to produce words. And then oral reading fluency and accuracy, those are ones that we're still working on, and they're improving, and he's getting much better. I think at his last progress monitoring, he's still slightly below benchmark, but I think he's close to 60, 65 words per minute, depending on, he does have a little bit of boy in him as far as staying focused and attending and making sure there aren't distractions, because obviously there have been a ton of distractions working from home. So I really would have loved to have seen how he would have done with his teachers through the end of the year, but I'm optimistic for next year. So at any rate, you really have to get those foundational skills to be accurate and automatic so that then it translates over into the oral reading fluency and the accuracy as well. So basically what I did is I love charts and graphs, and ChartDog is amazing. So if you're ever looking for a way to visually represent data, it's free. You can just put your data points in. So this represents Declan's correct letter sounds, and he really took off with this from the time that he started with that middle of the year score through the end. As with the whole words read, he was like on a steady trend, and then he did have a little dip, and then it just spiked right back up there, and he kept moving. And his oral reading fluency, even though, so the solid line where you see words per minute, this would have been for all of the charts, that runs directly across parallel to, I'm terrible with, told you math was not my thing, to the different axes. He's moving in the right direction to grow, but that words per minute green line, that's the horizontal line, is where we want him to be. And so he was making a solid progression towards reaching his goal. And then this was the beginning of the year spelling inventory to the end of year spelling inventory. So if you look at the one from the beginning of the year, and he, as the words first of all got more difficult, you can see he was scratching things out. And also I think that was probably a spelling inventory that would highlight a lot of what Dr. Moats talked about in the keynote this morning with co-articulation and affrication and variances and things like that, where he was, because of co-articulated sounds, making errors, to where he ended the year, where he was still representing the sounds of the words. And you can tell he has the silent E rule, because every long vowel had a silent E. I was so proud of him when I look at words like scrape, which at the end of the year was number 11, as well as number 13, which was champ, and being able to isolate all of those sounds to be able to write the word. Third, but he hadn't yet had instruction in our controlled vowels, and that every word has a vowel. So just the progression was really tremendous. And if there are any other school psychologists on here, I will say there are two things that have helped me tremendously throughout this journey. And there's just for like intervention planning and things like that, besides those different screening tools, a writing sample is incredibly helpful, because it allows you to really look at how fluent do those basic skills seem to be, but it also allows you to see what are the spelling errors that students are making. Because if they're not representing the accurate sounds of the words, that could be indicative of a problem with phonological processing. If it is orthographic, as in they produce the sound accurately, but they're not spelling it accurately, then that means I need to teach them the grapheme that goes with that sound. So that's really helpful as far as looking at something through a diagnostic lens, because oftentimes, when we have a kid who's struggling, we really want so badly to just highlight how much they're struggling to get them the help that they need. But having those pieces really allowed me to say, okay, we know that this is hard, so where do we need to start so that we can progress this student forward in a sequential way? So here was a spring writing sample from Declan. Would you like the cat in the hat to come to your house? No, because he will make a mess. My mom will be mad. I will be grounded for a week. He will wreck my house. And it's funny because I don't think the kid's been grounded a day in his life. Long-term consequences don't work for him. Short-term is much better way. But anyways, what I like to see here in that progression, yes, there's still a couple of places he scratched out and didn't erase those, but he uses periods and his spacing between words and his letter formation is better. And he still is, he's spelling some words, his representation of the sounds in words is accurate, but he's missing some of those spelling rules. So basically this last little segment, I really want to highlight how important the work is that we do and why it matters. And I know that there's been a lot of conversation and discussion about the science of reading and how important it is, and how making that shift, when you've been taught for so many years that this is the practice that you use and this is the best way to get kids to learn to read, it does challenge your thinking and it does require like a whole revamping. And even Dr. Fletcher, on that first day, I attended his presentation on cognitive assessment, and I was like, well, I really need to revisit this again because I have to make sure that I'm aligning my practices in the best way for kids. And I've seen so much positivity and energy and effort from educators. And like I said, I've been blessed with the people I've worked with, and very, very dear friends of mine are teachers. And you know, we have a lot of different conversations. I try not to talk about work a lot when I'm with my friends, but it usually ends up coming up anyways. And it's just interesting as we start talking through things, you know, where they're operating from. And I think all of us, again, the work that we do matters. And every single day, I could not be more grateful than I am for my son's teachers, any of my kids' teachers, because they are really the ones that are making the difference for them in the long term. And I think, you know, recently with all of the, you know, this talk about what we need to do for equitable practices, we really have to align all of our practices, even instructional practices, to be equitable for all kids. And I had shared the example about the young man, his shoes were torn, he had dirty clothes, and he really just wanted to be able to read. And I just thought that's going to change his trajectory for his future. And we owe it to him to give him the ability to break the cycle that he's in so that he doesn't have to live in poverty every day. And so as I was working through this whole situation with my own child and all of what I was experiencing from each of those different roles, like, okay, here's the mom side, it's all emotional, there's so much going on, there's behaviors and it's affecting home, to you're a school psychologist, what's next? How can you help him there? To literacy expert, I don't know that the practices are aligned to evidence that's going to help grow kids, to me communicating with the leadership team saying, I really don't know that this is the best way and I can help my child, but what about the others? And so it ended up that when we looked at this, so Declan is one of these data points, is that because now I work in this district now, ironically, and so if you look, this is the same group of students. So the same group of students in first grade and the same group of students in second grade. And what's important to look at is that we need to make sure that we are moving and progressing kids to be proficient readers, to set them up for success in all aspects, even with that social emotional learning piece. And there's so many factors we aren't able to control as educators. But we can try, like, what do you have control over? Those are the things we can tackle, right? So I remember as a school psychologist too, part of the exclusionary criteria we have to look at is, has this child received evidence-based instruction in reading, in the essential components of reading? And we have to mark a box, yes, no, in a legal document. And that was something that we contemplate, I think, frequently, because if we mark yes, then it's smooth sailing. The kid gets on to the next phase. If we mark no, then what are you saying? Our teachers aren't good, are you saying? And it's not that our teachers aren't good, it's the system that's not great. And we should equip our system with the right tools to make impact for kids. So at any rate, when we look at that, we need to have Joe Kovaleski, one of my all-time favorites. He said, we said, how do we know? When do we say yes to that box? And he said, are 80% or more of your kids proficient in reading? And he's like, that will tell you if your tier 1 core instruction is working for most kids, because most kids will respond about 80%. Then you'll have 15% that just need a little more intervention or presented in a different way or more instructional time, more practice. Then you'll have that 5% that's really critical. So, because the other part of this is we're not even fully steady with those green just at benchmark kids, because that benchmark is the lowest level of okay. So even the kids that just make it, they could still go either way. And it's really important that we make sure that we get them into the solid green, potentially blue, so that they can be successful. And so at any rate, this is one piece of that needs assessment, decision-making puzzle and pie. And from there, then tightening up tier 1 and what that has to look like, because my deck wasn't alone. And this, I would advocate for this no matter where I'm at. And I feel like many of us are in this same boat. And sometimes I think we start to feel like our wheels are just spinning and spinning and spinning. And we can advocate and we can talk about it and we can share evidence, but you really have to find that place where the rubber meets the road, and that person that's going to say, you know what, we need to look at this. And we need to look at it critically, and we need to look at it across many different elements. So that's where a needs assessment is really helpful. So Mr. Vukovic is the superintendent for schools in Indiana School District, and he and I are presenting 2 more sessions on how we then kind of took this from me reaching out as a concerned community member saying, I want what's better for all kids. And this wasn't my Declan, because I can teach my Declan. But what do we have to do to help all of our kids in our community and then beyond our community? So he listened, and that was kind of crazy. And when I say that his leadership is visionary, it truly is. And from one contact to him doing the whole needs assessment from a leadership systemic change, there have been a lot of good practices that have been able to be adopted in our district. And we're talking more about how we had that come to fruition in our leadership style actually next session, as well as there's another one tomorrow, I think at 11:15. But this was kind of, and I feel like this would be the case for any district. I mean, you take any of your kids who are struggling that you look at every single day, that could be your Declan. That could be your own child. That could be the students that you're supporting in your classroom. And when push comes to shove, sometimes you just need more resources, or you need another way of doing it. And what I learned after many years, I almost felt like I was going back for another doctoral degree, is that I had to be a voice. Like, I had to be a voice for those 50% of kids who might not have a parent at home, who might have a parent that's just trying to survive by working 2 jobs. So that child's at a child care center, or the older child who's taking care of younger siblings. Or, there's so many other pieces and parts to what's happening behind the scenes for our kids that I had to figure out how I could be a voice for others. And I think that's why I was motivated to share Declan's story, because I want it to impact change beyond my child, beyond our community school system, to the greater good. Because I think that if we do this and we do it well, we are going to create opportunities for so many kids. And I remember sitting in a meeting and talking with a woman, and she said, I'm helping to raise my niece. And she said, the work that you guys are doing is teaching her to read is going to change her life. It is going to give her hope for the future. It's going to change her trajectory, because had she not been able to read, she wasn't going to go on to be successful. So hearing those kinds of things is so impactful. And that's why we have to be voices for our students and for our systems, and try to work toward equipping ourselves with the tools and the knowledge that we can get our kids to read so that they can go on and be successful. So as I said, the work we do matters, and be the change that you want to see in the world. Because when you know better, you do better. And I feel that myself, even as a school psychologist. There's a lot that I've learned. So you don't come out of graduate school knowing everything, even though you feel like there's been a lot of knowledge that you've acquired. It's really tremendous how much more there is to know. So as a mother of a child who struggles and as a school psychologist, I have to say yes to the science of reading. And here's why. And this is only one teeny little piece of this pie, because there are many other kids who probably experienced this same situation. But I will share with you how Declan's skills kind of circle back around, because I couldn't love him enough into learning to read. There was no amount of love that was going to get him over that cusp of the frustration and the feelings of not measuring up or being good enough. He had to be taught, and love just doesn't teach reading. Teachers do. And teachers are so critical to every element of our education system. And as I have said, we are so blessed because I attribute his success to every single one of his teachers. So I'm gonna not cry again. Here's Dec, and this was about 3 to 4 months after the time that he spent practicing some of his reading skills. And I'm gonna do a better screen share because I know, whoops. Okay, so a little precursor to this video. This is, so Declan's reading another level text, and this one is about whether or not kids should have to work. So this was a good one. I'm gonna take it closer to the end because he actually read this one so well, he could tell you a little bit about what he read, which was not the case in the first video.
On.
Nope, take another look.
No longer had to work. They could play and go to school. Today, most children did not work, but some children still have to. Do you
what? Sound that out?
think this is fair? It would be nice if one day all children could play and go to school.
What do you think? Do you think it's fair for children to have to work?
Yeah, because you have to go to work and other people have to go to work and children have to do some work because you can't just walk around doing nothing. You have to do homework when you're in first grade or second grade or third grade.
So
it doesn't matter what grade.
So school's your work.
Yes.
And what happens to your brain when you go to school?
It gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and you get smarter and smarter and smarter.
That's right. Super proud of you, buddy.
All right, so there's my buddy. Again, still has a little bit of work to do, but we're getting there. So I think we have 10 minutes left. And so I don't know if there's any questions.
Angela, you nailed it earlier when you said to me that people really, the last session, they really weren't putting things in because they just wanted to hear your story and hear your passion. And that's exactly what I'm saying in the group chat.
Okay.
Everything's just absorbing it.
All
So
right.
thank you very much. Does anybody have anything at this point that they'd like to ask that they haven't already entered into the chat that I could share with Angela? I mean, I'm giving it some think time, but
That's okay. No, that's okay. Let's see. Yep. Yeah, no, and that's kind of with, you know, with something like this, it's kind of like here's a case study. We all have these kids, and it was a unique position for me to truly walk in the shoes whenever I was kind of like, you think you walk in the shoes, but you really don't walk in the shoes until you have your own sometimes. And so it just struck me in a different way. And I felt like it was something that helped even further ignite my passion to help kids get better and to give them opportunities. So
And I'm now getting some things. Oh, here's a question. How did you continue to build his confidence throughout his journey?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we really worked hard to do things in chunks, and I celebrated even the teeny tiniest of things that he did well. And I tried to offset it in other areas that he was really strong. So math is really strong for him. So I tried to say, and I also tried to make it normal. Like, you know, there's things that I do that are really hard. And the first time that I try it, I don't always do it well. But the more that I practice, the better I will get. And if you keep practicing, it will get easier, and your brain will learn and it'll grow, just like he said.
Mhm. And the other comments that I have here, thank you for sharing your side as a parent and a school psychologist, and that your passion is just coming absolutely across, and thank you very much.
Yeah, everybody is very welcome. This has been a really great lineup, and I've absolutely enjoyed being a part of this.
And so I thank you too officially
Yeah, thank you.
for this, and I thank everyone for attending the session.